It was a typical morning when a young girl and her father walked into a prestigious medical office, unaware that their day would soon take a dramatic turn. The girl, full of energy and excitement, could hardly wait for her routine checkup. She had been looking forward to the day, chatting away about her school projects and weekend plans, as her father listened quietly beside her. He was a man who worked hard, providing a comfortable life for his family. He was used to the spotlight in some ways, but when it came to his daughter, he preferred to stay in the background, quietly protective of her. The waiting room was filled with a few other patients, but the father's focus was entirely on his daughter. He noticed how her eyes sparkled as she spoke about her favorite hobbies, and he couldn't help but smile. His daughter was the most important part of his life, and nothing else mattered when it came to her safety and happiness. The girl's appointment wasn't anything special. It was just a regular checkup, something they had done countless times before. Yet, there was something in the air that day, something that made the father feel uneasy. It was as if his instincts were telling him to stay alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right, but he brushed it off, assuming it was just his overactive protective nature. As they called the girl's name, she stood up eagerly, ready to go into the examination room. Her father gave her a reassuring smile, telling her to be brave and that he would be right outside waiting for her. The doctor's office was pristine and professional, with a calm atmosphere meant to put patients at ease. But today, the father's gut was telling him something different. The young girl seemed unusually quiet as she followed the nurse down the hallway, her small footsteps echoing off the walls. The father couldn't explain it, but there was a tension in the air that made him feel uneasy. Moments passed, but as time went by, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The minutes stretched on, and his concern began to grow. The father had always been a patient man, but today was different. He didn't know why, but his instincts were screaming at him to go check on his daughter. The unease he felt in his chest was more than just nerves. It was a warning. Without another thought, he stood up from his seat and walked toward the hallway that led to the exam rooms. His mind raced as he walked down the corridor. What could be taking so long? He had expected the checkup to be quick, just a few minutes for the doctor to do his job and for his daughter to be on her way. But with every passing second, the father felt more and more out of place, like something was being kept from him. When he reached the door to the examination room, he knocked lightly, his hand trembling slightly. As he heard the doctor's voice from the inside, a wave of unease washed over him. He didn't know why, but something was telling him that this moment would change everything. He opened the door carefully, his eyes scanning the room. The doctor was standing near the examination table, but his attention was not on the girl. Instead, the young girl sat quietly, her body tense, her eyes wide with an unmistakable fear. The father's heart dropped into his stomach as he looked at her, and it didn't take long for him to realize that something was wrong. The little girl, usually so full of life and laughter, was now staring at him with eyes filled with confusion and distress. She hadn't said anything, but the expression on her face spoke volumes. The father could see the shift in her demeanor, and he just knew, that his worst fears were about to be realized. Something had happened, and the protective instinct that had always been his strength surged inside him. He wasn't sure what had gone on in that room, but whatever it wasn't right. His thoughts raced as he moved toward his daughter, instinctively pulling her close to him. He could feel her trembling in his arms, her small body pressing against him as if she was seeking comfort from a world that suddenly felt much too big and frightening. As he held her, he glared at the doctor, who stood there, looking strangely detached from the situation. It was then that the father knew this day would be a turning point. His daughter was his world, and he would stop at nothing to protect her. Whatever had happened, he was determined to find out, and he was not going to let anyone get away with hurting her. This moment, so unexpected, set the stage for everything that followed. The father knew his life was about to change forever, and he was ready to do whatever it took to make things right for his daughter. The father's heart pounded as he held his daughter tightly. The fear in her eyes was all too clear, and every instinct in him screamed to protect her, to make sure nothing else happened. He looked at the doctor, who was still standing there with a calm and almost indifferent expression. The moment felt surreal, and the father couldn't understand why the doctor seemed so unaffected by the situation. He was used to seeing professionals who cared deeply about their patients, but this doctor's demeanor was completely different. There was no concern, no apology, no reassurance, just coldness. The young girl clung to her father, her body still trembling, and for a moment, the father was at a loss for words. He wanted to ask his daughter what had happened, but he could see the fear written all over her face. She was too scared to speak, too shaken to explain. The father's mind raced, but he didn't want to overwhelm her. Instead, he gently cupped her face with his hands and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." The doctor, seeing that the father was focused on his daughter, cleared his throat and stepped forward. He tried to speak in his usual calm, professional tone, but the father wasn't having it. There was something about this doctor's behavior that didn't sit right with him, and he wasn't about to let it slide. "Is everything okay?" the father asked, his voice firm and laced with suspicion. The doctor quickly responded, trying to sound reassuring. "Yes, everything is fine. It's just a routine checkup. Sometimes kids get nervous, that's all." But the father wasn't convinced. His daughter's reaction was far more than just nervousness. He had seen enough to know that something had gone wrong. The doctor's words didn't ease the father's growing concern. In fact, they only made him more suspicious. You could see the doctor's hands slightly trembling, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. The father's mind flickered back to earlier, when he had felt that strange unease. Maybe it wasn't just his own nerves after all. Something had happened in that room, and whatever it wasn't normal. The father looked down at his daughter again, trying to comfort her. He could see her slowly starting to calm down, but her body was still tense, as if she were holding back tears. She hadn't spoken a word yet, and the father knew he couldn't push her too much. He needed to find out what had really happened, but he didn't want to make her feel worse. Turning back to the doctor, the father narrowed his eyes, his voice cold. "I think we need to talk about this more." The doctor's face tightened slightly, as if he were trying to decide whether to argue or just play along. He stepped closer, clearly attempting to smooth things over, but the father wasn't interested in playing games. The doctor muttered something about there being a minor issue, trying to downplay the situation. But his words didn't add up. The father's suspicions grew with every passing second, and he knew he needed to get to the bottom of it. Without wasting any more time, he turned to the nurse who had been standing by the door, waiting for an opportunity to intervene. The father asked her to step into the room. The nurse, who had remained quiet up until that point, hesitated for a moment before walking toward the father. She looked nervous, as though she knew something wasn't quite right either, but she didn't know how to speak up. The father's gaze was unyielding as he asked her, "Is everything really all right here?" The nurse looked between the father and the doctor, her face betraying a moment of uncertainty. Finally, she spoke up, her voice quiet. I think you should speak with the clinic manager." She looked down, clearly uncomfortable, but she had said enough. It was clear to the father that the nurse knew something was off, but was too afraid to say more. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together. The father's instincts told him to press further, but he could also sense that things were starting to escalate. He looked at his daughter, who was now clinging to his side, and he knew that whatever had happened in that room was far from over. The sense of urgency inside him grew stronger. His daughter had been harmed, and he wasn't going to leave until he found out exactly what had taken place. With his daughter still in his arms, the father held his daughter close as they left the examination room. She was still trembling in his arms, her small frame shaking with fear, and his heart ached for her. She hadn't said a word, but her silence spoke volumes. Every part of him wanted to know what had happened, but he knew it wasn't the right time to push her. She needed comfort, not questions. The father's mind, however, was racing. Something was terribly wrong, and he was determined to find out what it was. His daughter's well-being was his number one priority, and nothing was going to get in the way of that. As they made their way down the hallway, the father's gaze didn't leave the doctor or the nurse, both of whom were trailing behind them. The doctor had tried to keep his composure, but the father could tell he was nervous. It wasn't just a feeling. It was in the way the doctor's eyes darted around the room, the slight sweat on his brow. The doctor was hiding something, and the father could sense it. He could feel his anger starting to build, but he pushed it down for the moment. His daughter needed him to stay calm. They reached the front desk, where the receptionist looked up with a polite smile. But the moment she saw the expression on the father's face, her smile faltered. She could see the tension in the room, and it was clear something had gone wrong. The father didn't waste any time. "I need to speak to the clinic manager," he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. The receptionist hesitated for just a moment, then nodded and picked up the phone. The father's grip on his daughter tightened, not out of anger, but out of sheer determination. His daughter's fear was his own now, and he wouldn't rest until he knew she was safe. He could see that she was still avoiding his eyes, staring down at her feet as if she were afraid of facing him. It broke his heart to see her like this. She had always been so confident, so full of life, but now she seemed like a different person. It wasn't just the fear. It was the feeling that something had been taken from her, something that couldn't be easily fixed. Moments later, the clinic manager arrived. She was a tall woman with an air of authority, but her expression softened when she saw the father's worried face and the fear in his daughter's eyes. The manager tried to greet them politely, but the father didn't give her a chance to get comfortable. "Something happened in there," he said, his voice calm but full of tension. "My daughter is terrified, and I want to know why." The manager's face shifted slightly, and for a moment, it seemed like she might try to downplay the situation. But then she took a breath, as if weighing her words carefully. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," she began, but the father cut her off. "No," he said firmly. "I don't believe that for a second. I want to know exactly what happened." The manager's gaze flickered toward the doctor, who was standing at the edge of the room, looking as though he wanted to disappear. The father's eyes followed hers, and he could see the discomfort written all over the doctor's face. Something wasn't right here, and the father wasn't going to let it go. His daughter, still clinging to him, finally spoke up. He hurt me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But it was enough for the father to hear. His heart dropped into his stomach. It was the confirmation he had been dreading, but also the one he needed. His daughter had been hurt, and the person who was supposed to help her had caused her pain instead. The manager looked at the girl, her expression softening in sympathy. "I'm so sorry," she said, but the father could see that she was just as caught off guard by the revelation as he was. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. The father turned his attention back to the doctor. He could feel his anger rising, but he kept his voice steady. "You're going to explain to me exactly what happened in that room," he said, his tone leaving no room for excuses. "And then you're going to answer for it." The doctor didn't move. He was frozen, his face pale. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a look of guilt and fear. He tried to speak, but his words stumbled out in a mess of half-formed sentences. I didn't mean to," he began, but the father wasn't listening anymore. The father didn't need to hear more. His daughter's voice was all that mattered now, and she had spoken the truth. He couldn't believe that the doctor, someone who was supposed to protect people, had been the one to harm her. That trust had been shattered, and the father's only goal now was to make sure that no one else would be hurt in the same way. He looked at the manager, his face hardening. "I'm going to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug," he said. "You can count on that." The father could feel his blood boiling as he looked at the doctor, who was now nervously wringing his hands. The guilt on the doctor's face was clear, but it didn't change anything. The damage had already been done, and nothing could erase the terror his daughter had experienced. He wasn't just angry. He was hurt, and the hurt was turning into determination. He would make sure that his daughter's pain wouldn't be ignored, no matter who was responsible. He wasn't about to let this doctor, or anyone else, get away with it. His daughter was still clinging to him, her body trembling slightly, but he could feel her slowly starting to relax in his arms. He whispered reassuring words to her, trying to give her some comfort in this overwhelming moment. But deep down, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The first step was to make sure the doctor was held accountable for what had happened, and the father wouldn't stop until he got answers. The manager, still standing there, watched the exchange quietly. She had seen the shift in the father's attitude and realized that this wasn't a situation that could be swept under the rug. The look in his eyes told her that he wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just about the doctor. It was about protecting his daughter and making sure no one else went through the same thing. "Do you know how serious this is?" the father asked, his voice barely containing the anger inside. "This isn't just some mistake. You don't get to hurt a child and walk away without consequences." The manager nodded slowly, realizing the full gravity of the situation. "I understand," she said, though her voice was shaky. "I'll make sure that an investigation is launched immediately. We'll review everything and take the necessary steps." The father wasn't satisfied with just words. He needed action. "I want this doctor's credentials reviewed," he said, his voice firm. "I want everything about his past checked, and I want to know exactly what he did to my daughter." The manager seemed taken aback by the directness of his request, but she couldn't argue with his logic. The father was right. The doctor's actions couldn't be overlooked, and there needed to be a thorough investigation. But the father wasn't waiting around for the investigation to unfold. He had already made up his mind to take further action. Turning to the nurse, who was still standing quietly by the door, the father asked, "Do you know what happened in that room? Did you see anything?" The nurse hesitated for a moment, then nodded, her face pale. "I didn't see everything, but I heard the girl cry. I knew something wasn't right." Her voice trembled, and the father could tell that she was struggling with her own feelings about what had happened. "Why didn't you step in?" the father asked, not out of anger, but out of confusion. "Why didn't you do something?" The nurse lowered her head, clearly embarrassed. I was too scared. The doctor's in charge here, and I didn't know what to do." The father sighed, his frustration growing. The nurse's fear wasn't surprising, but it didn't excuse her inaction. Still, he knew he couldn't focus on that right now. He had to stay focused on his daughter, and on making sure that nothing like this would happen again. "We need to take this to the authorities," the father said, finally looking at the manager. "I'm not just going to leave here and hope things get handled. I need to make sure that this doctor never harms anyone again." The manager nodded, realizing the father was serious. "Of course, we'll cooperate fully with the investigation." But the father wasn't done yet. He needed to make sure that his daughter felt safe, and that the clinic understood just how serious this was. "I want this doctor suspended immediately," he said, his voice unwavering. "Until this is all cleared up, he should have no contact with any patients. Not a single one." The manager, now visibly shaken, agreed. She knew the father had every right to be upset, and she had to act quickly to avoid any further damage to the clinic's reputation. But it wasn't just about reputation. It was about the safety of the patients, and most importantly, it was about the little girl standing beside her father, still trying to make sense of the events that had unfolded. As the father spoke with the manager, his mind began to race. He knew that taking action was only the first step. His next move would be to consult a lawyer. This wasn't something that could be handled alone. He needed professional help to navigate the legal process and ensure that his daughter's voice was heard. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be many more challenges, but he was ready. The father didn't want to make his daughter relive the trauma by discussing every detail. but he knew it was necessary. As they left the clinic, the father felt the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. His mind raced with questions, concerns, and a fierce determination to protect his daughter. He knew he needed to find out every detail, to understand exactly what had taken place in that room. But right now, more than anything, he needed to help his daughter feel safe again. They walked in silence for a while, with him holding her hand gently. She stayed close to him, and he could see how shaken she still was. The father decided to take her to one of her favorite places, somewhere calm and comforting where they could both relax. He wanted her to know that she was loved, that she was safe, and that he was there for her. They arrived at a quiet park where they often came together. It was a place filled with happy memories, a place where she could just be herself, laughing and playing without any worries. He could see her slowly starting to relax as they walked past familiar trees and benches, the gentle rustling of the leaves creating a peaceful atmosphere. The father sat down on a bench, and his daughter settled beside him, still holding tightly to his hand. He knew this moment needed to be handled delicately. He didn't want to push her to talk, but he wanted her to know that he was there to listen whenever she was ready. After a few moments, he spoke softly. "I want you to know that you can tell me anything, and I'll always believe you. You don't have to say anything right now, but if there's anything you want to share, I'm here." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. She seemed to be deciding whether she could trust him with her feelings. Finally, after a long pause, she began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was scary, Dad. He was supposed to help me, but he hurt me instead. I didn't know what to do, and I was so scared to say anything." Hearing her words broke his heart all over again. He felt a surge of anger toward the doctor, but he kept it hidden, focusing on staying calm for her. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. You should never have to feel like that," he said gently. "You did the right thing by telling me. I'm so proud of you for being brave." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, letting her lean against him as they sat in silence. He wanted to make sure she knew that none of this was her fault, that she hadn't done anything wrong. "It's not your fault, okay," he assured her. "You did nothing wrong. I'm here for you, and I'm going to make sure this never happens again." As they sat together, he began to think about what he needed to do next. He had already decided to contact a lawyer, but he knew there was more to consider. He would have to file a formal complaint with the authorities, ensuring that there would be a full investigation. He would also reach out to anyone who might have information about the doctor's past. If this had happened to his daughter, he feared it could happen to others as well, and he wasn't about to let that happen. His daughter's trust in him gave him strength. He realized that, for her, he had to be strong and calm, even if inside he felt a storm of emotions. This wasn't just about seeking justice. It was about making sure she felt safe and loved. He knew that the path ahead would be challenging, and that they might face obstacles, but he was ready. His daughter's safety and well-being came first, and he would do whatever it took to protect her. As they watched the sun begin to set over the park, a sense of calm slowly settled over them. The father could feel his daughter's grip loosen as she relaxed by his side. They shared a quiet moment together, and he knew that this was just the beginning of their journey. But he also knew that they were in it together. She wasn't alone, and neither was he. He gently squeezed her hand and smiled down at her. "We'll get through this, you and me," he said softly. She looked up at him and gave a small, trusting nod, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. The father felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as a team. He would do everything in his power to make sure justice was served. But more than that, he would help his daughter heal, little by little, step by step. They were on this journey together, and he would never let go of her hand. As they left the park that evening, the father felt his resolve solidify. His daughter had shown remarkable courage in opening up to him, and now it was his turn to take action. He wanted to do everything he could to protect her and ensure justice was served. The next morning, after dropping her off with a family friend who could watch over her for the day, he set out to begin his quest for answers. His first step was to visit a well-regarded law firm in the city. He had read about their reputation for handling sensitive cases with professionalism and compassion, and he was certain they could help him navigate this difficult journey. When he arrived at the firm, he was greeted by a kind receptionist who, sensing his urgency, quickly arranged a meeting with an experienced attorney. The father sat across from the attorney, who listened carefully as he recounted the incident. The lawyer's expression remained calm, but the father could see a flash of empathy in her eyes as she listened to his story. She asked him gentle questions to clarify the details, showing a sincere understanding of the emotional weight of the situation. The father appreciated her thoughtful approach. He needed someone who would handle the case with both determination and care. The attorney explained the legal process to him in clear, simple terms. She told him that filing a formal complaint with the medical board and the police would be essential, as it would trigger an official investigation into the doctor's conduct. This step was necessary not only to seek justice for his daughter, but also to protect other families who might encounter this doctor in the future. The attorney assured him that she and her team would assist with every aspect of the case, from gathering evidence to representing them in court if needed. Feeling a sense of relief for the first time, the father agreed to move forward. They discussed the steps they would take together, including collecting all medical records from the clinic and interviewing potential witnesses. The attorney also mentioned that they would look into the doctor's professional history to see if any previous complaints or concerns had been filed. This way, they could build a strong case that would reveal the full picture of the doctor's actions. As the meeting wrapped up, the attorney expressed her admiration for the father's determination to stand up for his daughter. "This process might take time," she said gently, "but with your commitment and your daughter's courage, we can make sure her voice is heard. We'll work together every step of the way." Her words reassured him, and he left the office feeling a renewed sense of purpose. That afternoon, the father returned to the clinic to formally request all of his daughter's medical records. He wanted to be as thorough as possible, ensuring he had every piece of information that could support their case. The clinic staff seemed uncomfortable with his request, but they complied, handing over a file that contained detailed notes from her visit. He knew that even small details in these records could be crucial, and he planned to review them carefully with his attorney. Afterward, he reached out to the friend watching his daughter to check in on her. She was having a good day, and hearing that lifted his spirits. He wanted to ensure she still experienced moments of joy and normalcy amidst this difficult time. It was important to him that she didn't feel overwhelmed by everything that was happening. She was still a child, and he wanted to protect her innocence as much as he could. That evening, after dinner, the father sat with his daughter and assured her that he was taking steps to make things right. He didn't share every detail with her, wanting to protect her from the complexity of the legal matters. Instead, he kept it simple, telling her that he'd have found people who would help them, and that together they would make sure nothing like this happened again. She listened quietly, and then hugged him, resting her head on his shoulder. In that moment, he knew he was doing the right thing. In the days that followed, the father continued working closely with the attorney and her team. He answered every question they had, no matter how difficult, and provided every piece of information he could think of. Each meeting, each discussion, brought him one step closer to finding justice for his daughter. It was a slow process, but he was patient. He knew that real change often took time, and he was willing to wait if it meant making sure his daughter and others would be protected in the future. As days passed, the father began to see the first signs of progress. His attorney had started gathering crucial information, and the initial stages of the investigation were underway. The father kept his focus, meeting with the attorney regularly, sharing updates, and discussing each new piece of evidence that came to light. Every step was another move forward in his mission to protect his daughter and bring accountability to the clinic. It wasn't easy, but he felt encouraged by the steady progress and the support he received from those around him. One afternoon, he got a call from the attorney, who sounded more energized than usual. She told him that she'd uncovered information about other patients who had complained about the same doctor in the past. These complaints hadn't been widely publicized and had somehow been dismissed by the clinic. The father was stunned but not surprised. He had suspected that his daughter might not be the first to experience such treatment, and now they had the proof. This new information strengthened their case, making it clear that the clinic had a pattern of protecting the doctor rather than protecting patients. The attorney explained that these past complaints would give weight to their argument and help them show that this wasn't an isolated incident. The father felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger that other families had suffered, but relief that they now had a stronger case. He realized that they weren't just standing up for his daughter, but for all the families who had been hurt or dismissed. This fight had become bigger than he'd initially imagined, and he was even more determined to see it through. With this new information, the attorney suggested that they go public with their case. She explained that public awareness could not only help strengthen their case, but also warn others who might be at risk. The father took some time to think about this suggestion. He knew it could be a big step, one that might bring them into the spotlight and invite attention they hadn't planned for. But he also knew that going public could be a way to bring immediate accountability and protect other families. After discussing it with his attorney and a few close friends, the father decided to take the step. He agreed to go on record, sharing his story to help bring awareness to what had happened. He chose to speak out in a way that focused on the need for change rather than simply expressing anger. He wanted people to know that this was about protecting children and ensuring safe, respectful care. The father knew that his words could inspire others to come forward, creating a wave of support that could drive real change. The media coverage started small, with a few local reporters picking up the story. But soon, larger outlets began reaching out, interested in his case and the pattern of complaints about the doctor. The father, though a private man, remained focused on his purpose, willing to share his experience if it meant shedding light on an important issue. Each time he told his story, he made sure to speak calmly and clearly, focusing on the need for accountability and reform in the healthcare system. He emphasized that parents should be able to trust that their children are safe and cared for with respect. His words resonated with many people, and he started receiving messages of support from other parents who had faced similar situations. Meanwhile, the clinic began feeling the pressure. With the growing media coverage and the investigation now gaining momentum, the clinic's management couldn't ignore the issue any longer. They issued a statement saying that they were conducting an internal review, but the father knew this was more a formality than a real effort. He had come too far to let them brush this under the rug, and he was determined to keep pushing until real change happened. Through it all, he stayed grounded by spending quality time with his daughter. He made sure to create moments of joy and normalcy for her, taking her to her favorite places, playing games with her, and listening whenever she wanted to talk. Her happiness and healing were his top priority, and every time he saw her smile, he felt his own strength renewed. The father's journey was far from over, but he was now more confident than ever that they would see justice. He knew that standing up wasn't easy, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. Each day, as he saw the support pouring in from people who believed in his cause, he felt encouraged. He was doing this for his daughter and for every family that deserved respect and care. The father and his attorney continued to work tirelessly, step by step, with each move bringing them closer to holding the clinic accountable. And in his heart, the father knew that no matter how long it took, he would keep fighting for his daughter, for justice, and for a world where every child could feel safe. The investigation continued to unfold, and with each passing day, the father felt a mix of emotions. There were moments of uncertainty, moments when he wondered if they would be able to make the change he so desperately wanted. But there were also moments of hope, moments when he saw the growing support from the community, the media, and other families who were starting to speak out. It gave him strength, and he knew they were not alone in this fight. The case against the doctor was slowly gaining momentum. The attorney had managed to secure interviews with a few of the doctor's previous patients, and it became clear that the pattern of complaints was even worse than they had imagined. It wasn't just one incident. There were several others who had experienced similar problems with the doctor's behavior. The more the attorney gathered, the stronger their case became. As the father continued to stand by his daughter's side, he started to feel a pressure from all sides. His name had appeared in the news, and there were a few moments when he found himself facing uncomfortable questions from reporters or even strangers. He had never wanted to be in the spotlight, but now he was speaking out not just for his daughter, but for others who had been hurt and silenced. Despite the media frenzy, he stayed focused on what mattered most: his daughter's well-being. He reminded himself that this journey was about more than just legal battles. It was about healing and protecting those who needed it the most. He made a point to spend quality time with her each day, keeping her surrounded by love and comfort. One day, while they were having breakfast together, his daughter spoke up in a quiet, thoughtful tone. "Dad," she said, "I know you're trying to fix everything, but I'm okay. Really. I'm not as scared anymore." Her words brought a mix of relief and pride to his heart. It was a sign that despite everything they had been through, his daughter was healing. She was strong, much stronger than he had realized, and he had helped her find that strength. The father gave her a gentle smile. "I'm so proud of you. You're so brave," he said, his voice full of emotion. He knew she would carry this experience with her for the rest of her life, but he was determined to ensure that it would never define her. They were doing the right thing, not just for them, but for others who needed to know that they were not alone. As the days went by, the clinic began to feel the pressure mounting. The public outrage was growing, and the media was demanding answers. The father knew it was only a matter of time before the clinic could no longer ignore what had happened. The attorney continued to push forward, gathering more evidence and pushing the case through the legal system. The father, while still focused on his daughter's healing, remained committed to the cause. One afternoon, the attorney called him with news that felt like a turning point. The clinic had finally agreed to an official settlement. It wasn't the same as a trial, but it was a significant step. The father was relieved to hear this, but he knew it was just one chapter in a larger story. The settlement meant the doctor would no longer practice at the clinic, and the family would receive compensation for the harm that had been done. But more importantly, it was a public acknowledgement that the clinic had failed to protect its patients. The father met with his attorney to discuss the terms of the settlement. He didn't want this to be just a quick fix. He wanted to ensure that the doctor's actions would be exposed for what they were, and that no other families would be affected in the future. The attorney assured him that they had done everything they could to make the settlement as impactful as possible. The father took a deep breath, realizing that this was the first step in a longer process. He knew they still had a long way to go, but this was a victory nonetheless. They had fought for what was right, and they had made progress. The father's heart swelled with pride as he thought of his daughter, how far she had come, and how strong she had become. Together, they had made a difference. Together, they had turned a painful experience into a source of power. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, the father knew one thing for sure. They would face whatever came their way, side by side, with courage and determination. It wasn't just about seeking justice anymore. It was about showing the world that no one, no matter their position or power, should be above accountability. They had become an example of what it meant to stand up for what was right, and that, above all, was the most important victory of all. As the weeks passed, the father found himself reflecting on how much had changed. The journey they had been on, though difficult and filled with challenges, had given him a deeper appreciation for his daughter's strength. She had grown from the quiet, scared girl she once was into a young person who now spoke out with confidence, her voice no longer hesitant but powerful. Despite the legal battles still ongoing, there was a sense of peace that had slowly begun to settle in their home. The media attention had started to fade, but the impact of their story lingered. More people were speaking up about similar experiences, and the father knew that by sharing their journey, they had sparked a conversation that was long overdue. The clinic, once a place where his family had trusted their care, was now being held accountable for the actions of a single doctor. The father knew that this was just the beginning, but it was a huge step toward ensuring that no child would have to go through the same ordeal. The doctor's career had come to an end, with the clinic officially announcing his removal from their staff. But the father knew that justice wasn't just about one person losing their job. It was about creating a safer, more transparent environment for everyone. He kept in touch with the attorney, who continued to help him navigate the remaining steps of the case. They were working on a resolution that would not only provide compensation for his daughter, but also ensure that any medical institution moving forward would be more diligent in its hiring practices, particularly when it came to protecting children. Through it all, the father remained committed to making sure his daughter had the life she deserved. They still had their moments of fun together, enjoying simple things like playing board games at home, walking in the park, and talking about anything and everything. He kept reminding her how proud he was of her bravery, telling her she had been so strong and wise beyond her years. And in return, she always reassured him with her smile, the kind of smile that made everything worth it. One evening, after a family dinner, the father took a moment to look at his daughter, who was laughing with her friends over something silly. She was growing up, and though her childhood had been marked by a difficult event, he realized that her spirit remained unbroken. She had learned resilience, and that was something no one could ever take from her. The case eventually came to a close. The settlement was reached, and though it didn't undo the harm that had been done, it did provide a sense of closure. The father had achieved what he set out to do. His daughter's voice had been heard, the doctor was held accountable, and the clinic had been forced to reassess its practices. It was a bittersweet victory, though, because no matter how much progress was made, the emotional scars of that day would always remain. But that wasn't something that defined them. What truly mattered was that they had faced a challenge head-on and come out stronger on the other side. The father had seen his daughter grow from this experience, and he knew that she would carry that strength with her for the rest of her life. She had learned to speak up for herself, to stand firm in the face of adversity, and to trust that she could make a difference. And as for the father, he had learned something too. He had learned that sometimes the toughest battles were the ones that brought the greatest rewards. The love he had for his daughter had driven him to do whatever it took to protect her, and he had done it. It hadn't been easy, but looking back, he knew it had been worth it. Together, they had shown the world that no matter the obstacles, justice and integrity could prevail. The father walked away from this experience not only with a sense of relief, but with a renewed purpose to continue advocating for what was right. He knew that their journey wasn't just about them. It was about creating a better world for all children, where they could feel safe, respected, and valued. As time passed, they found peace in knowing they had made a difference. It wasn't just about the legal victory or the public attention. It was about the lessons they had learned and the strength they had discovered within themselves. They had faced something unimaginable and had come out of it stronger, their bond unbreakable. And in the end, that was what truly mattered.